All right, so today I have on the show a very old friend, James Honda-Pinder, who I've known since, like, what was it, 7? I don't know.
7, yeah.
Yeah, and James is head of strategy at We Are Social, done amazing campaigns for Adidas, Samsung, Apple. And one of the reasons I wanted to invite James on is I've run campaigns past him in the past that I've done with work related to marketing, advertising, and he's a whiz at storytelling. We actually call him Hondi, so you may hear me say that during the show. But we're going to be talking a lot today about storytelling because I think that's a topic that's come on before, is very popular. But yeah, to kick off, Hondi, I wanted to ask, I always give the analogy of like the Lion King, that in the Lion King, without Scar, you wouldn't have a story. And we're going to talk about that later, the importance of like the villain in the story. But maybe get a bit about your life here. What's been some of the villains and things in your story?
Wow. You really threw me in the deep end early. I was going to say I'm honoured to be here, but after that question. Villains in my story. I mean, probably yourself or myself, actually not yourself, myself, probably, kind of, I think when you're younger, you're kind of get in your own way a lot. And then I think from a personal point of view, maybe, kind of the loss of parents and things like that early on in my life would be something that came up, would be a scar. But I also think that those moments are opportunities to, kind of turn adversity into advantage. And actually that's the role that storytelling has played in my life, is how do you reframe things in your mind to, I guess, find inspiration within them.
Fascinating. So yeah, you mentioned, through adversity is often where you find strength. So maybe we could talk about it, one from a personal level, some of the things that have happened to you, and then also, as you said, it relates to storytelling in general, and how are those two things interrelated?
Yeah, well, I think, I read this book quite in my 20s around Stoicism. I think it's by a guy called Ryan Holiday, called The Obstacle is the Way. And I think it's a bit of a kind of pamphlet version of what Marcus Aurelius was talking about in Stoicism. But that notion that, like, the obstacle and the struggles that you go through will fundamentally shape you and evolve you. And you can either let that shape you for the better or shape you for the worse, I think there's a conscious choice that hopefully, with a little bit of kind of emotional resilience and help from friends and loved ones, that, you can turn those moments of struggle into, moments that make you, and that give you the strength of character for all the things that life's going to throw at you. I think that, in every film, in every book that you read that's engaging, there's always some sort of hero's arc. Yeah. And, I think that the anchor of that arc is always some sort of challenge or obstacle or adversity or something that they're fighting against and trying to fight through.
So you mentioned the hero's arc. I think that's something a lot of people won't have heard of who are listening to the show. Could you kind of explain that in more detail?
Yeah, so I think, if you look at, like, I think Pixar have done a really good kind of depiction of this, but like there's like kind of 6 stages to kind of every story. So there's kind of the context, and then there's the kind of build up, and then there's a sense of jeopardy, right? So there's something kind of an inciting incident that happens that causes the protagonist of the story to be kind of put onto a path of needing to transform and change. And then as a result of that, they kind of go through pitfalls and struggles and peaks and troughs, and then eventually they have some sort of kind of happy conclusion or outcome. So the hero's arc is that kind of emotional narrative that takes you from a place of like nothing's happening to a point of struggle to a point of triumph.
Okay, so you got the hero's arc. What are some of the other things that you think are key in like other stories? So say, imagine when you're working, you've even done this exercise with me, but when you're like analyzing a marketing campaign or even a film script or whatever it is, what are some of the other elements you're looking for in a story?
I mean, I would always start with context. I always think that context is that you need an awful lot of context to understand anything, and I always think that's the most fascinating part of any story, is actually the background that frames it. In every one of the things that I guess I'm kind of fortunate in advertising and to do is that you get to skim over the top of lots of different industries. So you can go from selling sportswear to mobile phones to groceries, and you need to understand what is the context that sits behind, I don't know, the rise of athleisure in sportswear, or, how is smartphone innovation slowing down, the role of now AI in, kind of today's lives. That's context that's very rich and meaningful to any story that you're trying to tell around those kind of products. And I think that context is super important in any story that you tell. You know, it's like if you're trying to, I guess, in a workplace, explain your decision making, you need to give some understanding on some context of like what happened before, why that happened, why that shaped your thinking, and why that's, I guess, pushing you towards this particular line of thinking or decision making now. So I think context is super important. And probably the thing that I find people forget to do often is kind of connect the dots to what happened before, and why we're here and what we're trying to do next.
Yeah, I'm nodding because in kind of what I do with sales and sales training, I see that with salespeople all the time. I'm probably even guilty of it myself a lot of the time, where you're contacting someone and you think they've got the context of everything you're talking about, and in their head they're like, what is this person talking about? Because as you said, the reason that I wanted to show you this is because of X, right? And often people don't make those connections, as you said. Yeah,
and I think context is something that is very kind of can be a shared experience or thing you can talk about. You know, if you're talking about something like when you know, I used to work on a grocery brand in Singapore where I live, and it was just after the pandemic, and we were talking about how you know, the cost of living was rising after the pandemic, and the role of groceries had changed. You know, and it was actually suddenly your grocery shopping had become your activity for the day. That was the only place you were allowed to go. That's like a shared experience that you have, and the context that you're kind of talking about allows you to both kind of almost empathize with each other in a different way.
Interesting what you said there, because it's like that grocery shopping, which is something that's normally something quite mundane. As you said, during the pandemic, it's actually the time you get to go out of the house. So it's like your vacation.
It's like your pastime, right?
So I guess context can change as well, right? So I think that's an important part of the story, like how the context is changing to different stakeholders.
I mean, I think that, you know, the reason why stories are always engaging is because the world that they're describing, you know, is always in flux. You know, I always say stories are how we make sense of the world. You know, it's how we connect to the people around us, how we remember the people that you know, we've lost, how we plan for our futures and the lives that we want to build. We kind of imagine them through stories. We don't imagine them through lists and bullet points. So I think stories are all around us, and they'll always be all around us.
Okay, so you got the context, the villain we talked about, the hero's arc. What else? Imagine, someone out there is trying to write a book, write a social media campaign, whatever it is. What else should they be looking for?
I always say to my team whenever we're like kind of writing strategies for brands, or is give people the view from the top of the mountain. You know, like don't explain to people like how hard it's going to be to get there. That can kind of come a lot later, but you know, especially in this very kind of attention starved moment that we live in, you know, where people are kind of, their attention spans are shortening, you know, people's eyes are on a swivel, they're kind of doom scrolling. You got to work so hard to capture someone's attention and keep it. So, you know, I think that kind of you say you're like pitching to someone, or if you're trying to entertain someone, you know, it's kind of give them the top view from the top of the mountain early. Like tell them what to expect. And then I think another like really important facet of good storytelling is knowing what to leave out. You know, there's nothing worse than a story, like a joke that goes on too long, you know, or like a story that kind of is very meandering and winding. I mean, you know, we've got one friend in particular.
I was just going to say the same thing.
I think we both know who he is.
I reckon he'll listen to this as well.
Yeah, I think he will. Sorry, Tom. But, you know, he's been prone to a meandering story, and, you know, he does lose his audience. So, I think good storytelling is often about sacrifice.
Yeah. So are the two related about being at the top of the mountain in the context? Because I guess that's the like 360 context from the top of the mountain.
I don't know. I've never really thought about it like that. I mean, I think it's all about like, I guess, simplicity is always the kind of ultimate sophistication when it comes to storytelling. That was something that we used to talk about at Apple. And I think that, you know, giving people the view from the top of the mountain is like, you know, the notion is you've worked very hard to identify and articulate for people the most kind of precise and kind of succinct form of what you're trying to say. And then the fact that, you know, you have not, I guess, obfuscated that with all kinds of extra baggage or unnecessary context and detail means that you're just being more respectful to your audience in terms
Yeah.
of like their time, their attention. And it's like, you know, if you look at like stand-up comedians, I think they're, you know, the best storytellers around. You know, it looks like they're just kind of having a conversation with the audience, but every line is rehearsed, like every word is precisely chosen. You know, the intonation that they use, the tone of delivery, the pacing, the cadence, all of that is so artfully precise, but you almost don't feel like it is. I think that's almost a good example of kind of what I'm talking about there. You know, they've worked to get it cut down to a point where, you know, nothing is cumbersome.
I was thinking with stand-up comedians as well, it's like the punchline, right? And then you were talking about you have to know what to leave out, because the punchline, it can't come at the beginning because then it's not funny. It's like that suspense almost that you're creating. And I talk about it in business when you've got like a case study, for example. If you just say, hey, we made this company in 50 million, whatever it is, with no context. Yeah. Sometimes also people don't believe you. So it's that like story that's behind it, the villain as well. So it's like that kind of context. Again, it comes back to context, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And then do you think these principles you're talking about, because I know we talked about before that you came on that you don't consider yourself like a spiritual person, but I think there is this spiritual element to storytelling, and I've talked to you about this before, like Jung's got these archetypes which are through different stories, but do you think there are almost these eternal values of stories that like all successful stories that, you know, are listened to or read or seen throughout time, they have these elements that are kind of eternal in a way?
Well, I think stories are by nature of what they are, you know, emotional vehicles. So they're very good at carrying higher level thoughts around. It could be around spirituality, it could be around morality, you know, like parables from, you know, I don't know which religion, but, you know, a lot of these kind of parables that come from faith and scripture, you know, are passed down through generations because they're just good descriptions of why you shouldn't do this or why you should act like that, you know. So I think that storytelling has a very important role in, I guess, importing or in spirituality from one generation to the next, and I guess keeping, I guess, alive what is the kind of, I guess, the basics of what makes, you know, humanity great, you know, like the behaviors and mindsets that we should all kind of have in order to have a positive and progressive society. Yeah,
I really like the description actually, like stories are a way to transfer morality like and values and stuff through different generations. I never heard it described like that.
Yeah, I mean, like even like, you know, I remember when I was 7 or 8, you know, I got really into like Greek myths and things like that. And actually, if you go back and read them, you know, there's some sort of like moral in each one, right? So like, you know, Icarus, don't fly too close to the sun, you know, like, and it's pretty interesting that like, that's a pretty highfalutin concept when you think about it, right? Don't be too audacious, don't be too arrogant. But like the way it's kind of captured in that story, you could almost get a 7 or 8 year old to understand it. Like, again, that's the beauty of storytelling, right? Is that it takes very kind of high level concepts, and if you can do it well, you can break it down and pack it into something that's really kind of understandable and digestible and shareable.
Yeah. Going back to almost theme of this podcast, Cosmic Road, Spiritual and Material, from a story element, I think another way of looking at it is like the logical side and then the like emotional side of storytelling. And I think you kind of need that balance between the two. So again, if you're working on a campaign, how do you find that balance between those two things?
I mean, so I guess like there's almost like there's words and numbers almost in that kind of emotional versus rational thing. So you know, I think that in different industries, I guess you need to have a different weightage of what you would use. I think that in some kind of advertising agencies, you, depending on the client, depending on the type of agency you are, you can lean a little bit more into the words versus the numbers, you know. And the thing with words is that, you know, I think there was some agency head that I heard about recently who, when they do a presentation, they just use newspaper cuttings or newspaper headlines, and that's it. It's like, you know, 30 slides and it's just it, and she just talks around them. And I thought that was just like so fascinating and powerful. But I think there's quite a few clients out there who would just be like, no, we need some hard data. So like balancing the emotional and the rational, it really depends on, I think, who you're speaking to, what the intention of your presentation or your pitch is. And it can also be like, you know, it can be dependent on different cultures, you know, like in Asia, where I currently am, there are certain clients that I'll work with that are much more rational, and they want to kind of see the logical side of the story. And for them, the data provides a lot of kind of certainty and reassurance, and that's what they're looking for. Versus, there are some clients I work with in other parts of the world where they want the inspiration, they want the adventure, they want the sense of like kind of commercial and cultural impact of like of the creative possibility. And I think that that's another really important kind of point around storytelling, is that you can't have a one size fits all thing. You've got to figure out what is the kind of intention with which you're sharing the story, to whom and to what objective, and then I guess design back from there.
Yeah, so I missed that part out in your bio that you're living in Singapore, but grew up in London, which is obviously how we know each other. Obviously working out in Singapore, which you've been doing for quite a few years now. What changes did you see like culturally in terms of your job and like the way people tell stories? As you said, some people were like very data driven, but again, do you think most of the values you'd seen like working in the UK and with like Western clients, or did you learn some new things out there?
Oh, definitely learnt so many new things. I think that the thing that I guess is most profound when you go over, because I mean Singapore itself is an incredible kind of cultural melting pot of nationalities from all parts of the world. So it feels really cosmopolitan, really diverse. I think the real lesson when you go to somewhere like Singapore is that you end up doing a lot of work with other countries in the region, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Japan, China, etc. And then suddenly, like, understanding the cultural nuances of these countries, like I think from, I guess a Western mindset sometimes, I've also been in organizations guilty of kind of looking at Asia and going, oh, it's just they're treating it like almost like a block on a map. Yeah. And actually it's, 10, 12 of the most kind of culturally diverse and interesting countries in the world. And if you told them that they were like this or they were like that, or you told the Koreans that, you're like the Japanese, they would throw you out of the building. So, and vice versa, to be honest. So, I think that was probably the biggest eye-opening thing was just how much cultural vibrancy and diversity there is, and how important it is to appreciate that. And I think what an opportunity it is to appreciate that if you are, coming from a different kind of psyche. Yeah,
100%. Yeah, I guess the same as like, sometimes people look at Europe, or if you're like an American company trying to conquer Europe, you're like, oh, European culture, but the way people operate in France versus Germany.
I mean, like, do you think there's anything similar about the British and the French and the Germans, and the Italians? No. So like, we understand that because we've kind of grown up here, but then why would you think the same of Asia?
Yeah, 100%. I know one of the things you want to talk about is that I think the skill of storytelling is not emphasized enough as a skill, like one in the workplace, but two, I was thinking this is even something that should be taught more at like schools and like formal education. So if you could run us a bit through that.
Well, I think that like in the UK, actually, you get quite a good kind of non-school education from the pub, like, and the fact that a lot of your kind of social interactions are in storytelling kind of heavy places, and like people also like, have a few drinks, people are more likely to be able to want to share, and like they've got people listening, and the whole setup is around sharing stories. So I think that it's almost like a non-orthodox education, but I think that in other parts of the world, like what perhaps presentation or public speaking, or knowing, I guess, like how to write, like at the end of the day, like when you're putting together any kind of a story, whether it's a presentation, whether it's a pitch, whether it's, a poem, whatever, like ultimately the kind of foundation of it is like, can you put words together, and can you choose the right words, ensure they're saying the right things? Can you ensure that you're not, using too many words, or like not bloating the story, so I think that teaching more of that as a skill. I don't think when we did English, as a subject at school, we did English literature, and you study Shakespeare and William Blake and things like that, and then you do English language, which is like grammar, and those two things I'm sure are very important, but you don't actually learn the fundamental skill and point of using the dexterity of the English language to your advantage, or whatever language that you're speaking.
It's true, and I think every subject where you're writing, even if it's like biology, right, you're writing like an essay on the body or organs or whatever it is, there's still a story you can tell of
exactly
other people who studied it, right, and what they did and the problems they encountered, you know.
Yeah, so definitely. I mean, like, so, and I think it's such a useful skill if you can pick it up. You know, one of the things, whenever I interview someone to join my team, I would always have the same question, depending on regardless of, you know, age or position that they're going for, which is, you know, some time ago you were born, today you have the misfortune of speaking to me, what happened in between? And, you know, there is no wrong answer, right? It's just tell me your story. But I will form a pretty kind of informed impression of that candidate based in the first 2 minutes on how you handle that question. Because I think that if you can't express your own story, I don't know how you can work in an interesting and articulate way. How can you work in an industry that's all about telling stories to people you don't know about products that you might not be using, you know?
You said something there around the interview question is what happened between was it me being born or the person being born?
The person being born.
The person being born and you sitting with them. So I was thinking that's like giving the concept of time as well, and that's, or context, should I say. So do you think that's important as well? Do you think that's one of the elements, say with context, is often missing, is like where in time are we? Like, is this now? Is this in the past? Yeah.
Well, like, it's quite interesting, like, when with that question, which is, when do people start? So, like, there's some people who are just like, they're like, well, you know, I graduated university at this age, and then the first impression you get from that person is like, okay, they're like quite formal, you know, and they don't want to give too much away. And then, like, you know, there'll be some people who are like, well, when I was a kid, I was a lot like this, you know. And what I think is really interesting is that as soon as someone opens with like a story about their childhood or what they were like, I feel much more kind of emotionally engaged in what they're saying, because I feel like they're letting me in, you know. And I think that, you know, I guess sharing personal anecdotes or some sort of kind of window into their soul, I personally kind of resonate with that a lot more. And I think that that's another really important facet of storytelling, I think, is, you know, dropping in the odd personal anecdote or, you know, being honest and truthful with, you know, perhaps some of the weaknesses or insecurities or anxieties that you might have as part of the story, you know. So one of the most powerful things to say is, you know, I don't know. I don't know if this is going to work. But having looked at, you know, what this challenge is, and then how some other people have done it, you know, what our strengths and weaknesses are, I think that this could be the way forward. So, yeah, I think that confident uncertainty can be like a really
confident uncertainty,
really kind of strong way to embellish and add extra resonance to your story.
You kind of predicted my next question there, because when you were talking about the personal side of storytelling, one of the things I was thinking is no one likes that storyteller that's just constantly talking about themselves, right? And like, I'm the big am, etc. And I think especially in like British culture, because maybe there's that like fake humility element where we don't want to talk about ourselves and etc. But you do need to tell your personal story. It's some way you can be relatable. And I know in like North America, for example, because I have North American colleagues, and just there's more of that element of talking about yourself. It's a bit more like socially acceptable, but you want that balance where it's like you're not just the guy that's like boasting all the time, right? And I guess how you can get around that is a bit of that British like self-deprecation and owning your problems and being open about those, and that creates a bit of humor as well.
I mean, I think the analogy I use around that is this is a football one, so if you have any non-football listeners, you know, I'm sorry, but like sort of something you'll get, like, you know, Mourinho, when he came over to Chelsea, starts calling himself the special one, and that was, you know, it was of its time. It was he was pretty special, you know. He won a lot of things, but, you know, he also painted himself as incredibly arrogant, very self-involved, self-important, etc. And then, you know, a few years down the line, Jurgen Klopp, you know, my personal hero of, you know, the greatest football club in the UK, you know, he comes to Liverpool and he's like, I'm not the special one, I'm the normal one. And like, you know, the way that like he was able to use Mourinho as a cultural reference point, and then suddenly like that, just
the context,
he bakes like that one sentence, you know, he's told a story about himself. He's positioned himself in the minds of Liverpool fans, other football fans, the media, as someone who's like, you know, a little bit more irreverent, but, you know, a little bit more down to earth, sense of humor, just very likable, So I think that, the self-deprecation or some sense of inadequacy or not being so kind of up yourself is definitely an important part of, a good story, confident uncertainty.
Confident uncertainty.
Yeah.
I really like that. When we were speaking before, we were talking about like a few different topics we could discuss on the show. And one of the ones I was interested in, which I wasn't expecting, was about like self-talk or like self-therapy through story. So yeah, we could explain. Not something I'd heard about before.
So I think everyone has like, times where their brain just runs away with them, and it might be, some people call it anxiety, you have your insecurities, where you worry about things. I don't know how you do it, like, you're much more of a cosmic guy than me, but like is, when I try to self-soothe or like try to talk to myself about it, I frame what's happening through the lens of like a story. So it's like, this happened and this happened, and as a result this has been the change. We've gone from this point to this point, and therefore it's okay to feel like this, or it's okay to think like that. So it's more I use it as a way to talk to myself about how I'm feeling, why I'm feeling this, and I guess figuring out what's the the emotional resolution of the thing that I'm thinking about.
Yeah, interesting. I think I deal with it in the same way as you. There's a book I really recommend anyone listening, and to you, Honda, called Letting Go by David Hawkins.
Okay.
And he basically talks about, we've got all these emotions that we see as like negative, right? Like anger, fear, shame, whatever it is, but they're totally normal. And going back to like eternal stories, eternal values, these are things that are felt throughout time in different stories. So I think the key is more to like recognize when they come up. So even this morning, I was like listening to a meditation app, and like I had a bit of a bad morning with work, and then I was working late last night and all these things. So in my head, I was like quite stressed, didn't sleep. And then suddenly I'm like, anxiety, whatever you want to call it, your head's all over the place, but you're listening to a meditation app. So in my head, I'm like, how the fuck can I be thinking all these things listening to a meditation app? It doesn't make sense. But then it's taking a step back and being like, no, it's normal. You're in this situation, you're running a business, it's stressful. So I'm like, that's fear, that's anxiety, it's fine. Just let it go and come back to the moment. What are you doing right now? You're listening to this app, and you're listening to this app so you don't feel like this, right? So just get back into it. And then a lot of that goes to present. So I think it's understanding yourself and your emotions. And I think a lot of that from a psychological level is that being in touch with your unconscious, because a lot of the time the unconscious is like ruling you. So that's one of the things I do in those situations.
But you've rationalized your unconscious thinking by contextualizing, your a pain point and, whatever the kind of the annoying thing is that, you've been vexed by, into a story, right? And then kind of connecting it with another story, which is, you're running a business. There are going to be days where sometimes you're the pigeon, sometimes you're the statue, and like this is one of those moments where you're the statue. Like, do you like journal it? Do you write it down, or do you?
I don't journal. It's interesting. I read a lot of psychology books, so I've actually found Honda's become the interviewer.
Yeah, I know.
He's flipped it on his head here. I read a lot of psychology books because I've found it's a lot more helpful than reading like sales books. Because I feel like, and we talked a lot about this on the show, like getting ideas from other fields is more innovative versus everyone reading the same books with the same ideas. Yeah. And then so a lot of modules we've created, so we've got this module called like Selling with Less Ego, and it's a lot about the David Hawkins stuff of identifying these things. Or I want to call this person, it's like, oh, what if they're angry, what if they're, and we're just creating stories in our head. It's like, no, it's fair. It's normal to fear someone when you're about to call them because you don't know where they are, what they're doing, etc. Right? So I think that in a way has been like therapeutic reading these psychology books because it's helped me like understand myself a little bit more.
Right.
Yeah.
So I like, for the self-soothing thing, like often I'll write it out, like what I'm thinking, and I'll write it out in the form of like, not like a tale, like a bullet point that has a little bit of a kind of story format.
Interesting.
Like, and then I'll just write it into the notes app on my phone. And the fact that I've just got it out of me makes me feel better. It's almost like it like lightens the cognitive load. Yeah. And like, I never go back and read it because like, I think it would just, it's probably just me complaining. But it's really interesting how like there is this emotional catharsis from even just the process of extracting it from inside my mind into the notes app on my iPhone and just doing it through a quick story explaining why, what,
Very
when
interesting.
and how.
Yeah, because I think I do that with work, right? So if I've got like a task or something that's like annoying, I'll write down and think, okay, what's the solution? What's the problem here? But then if it's like a non-work thing, and often you're worried about non-work stuff, I don't write that down. And that's a good point, that even those things, it's like, and my dad gave me good advice years ago. It was like, write stuff down, right? It's just like unloading the burden. And it's like, whatever it is, it's like, it's this big theme of, you said like journaling, but it doesn't have to be formal journaling at the end of every day. I'm going to write my day. It's just in the moment type journaling, right?
Yeah, I don't have, I don't have like a diary or something, but like, the notes app on my iPhone's got some rather crude and unformed thoughts, but it's definitely helped.
We got into a little bit of like psychology there. So what about that when it comes to storytelling as well? And I know maybe we could tie in a couple of points here, because I know you said storytelling is often like abused by people for bad means. So people are good at storytelling, but not with the right intentions. And I imagine a lot of that's getting into the psychological element of like fear and, negative emotions. So it'd be good to hear more of like how psychology paints into this picture as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, like if you look at, without trying to, I know you don't want to do too much politics, but like more the psychology of the vote. So something like Brexit, right? Like selling the status quo, which is don't change, versus, like all these things could happen if we take this bold step. From a psychology point of view, one of those is a lot more exciting to hear and tell stories about than the other, right? I think those, again, it was when the referendum happened in Scotland around independence, you could see that the dream of self-determination was something that, a lot of the Scots were like super, super kind of impassioned by. And that's just because, it's just an easier thing to tell stories about, and there's nothing, I guess, wrong with wanting to paint a vision of what, those things could be. But I think that you have like got to a point where you have certain people, certain actors in the political sphere, in the and in public forums, I guess, weaponizing storytelling with false facts in order to, I guess, kind of psychologically maybe manipulate, I guess, public opinion towards them, and that's happening, all across the world. And I think that, social media doesn't help in that, but it's definitely happening in a public sphere around politics, but I know you don't want to dive into that too much. The one when you said to me like we can't really do politics, so I was thinking, okay, what's like another example? And like the other one I thought about was I know this one sounds stupid, but it was Gary Neville. Okay. Gary Neville, like he was on the Diary of a CEO podcast, and he was talking about mini retirements. Did you know this? And he was like,
I listened to that episode, but I can't remember that bit.
He basically was like, I'll go to Spain from Friday to Sunday, I'll have a mini retirement, and it would then, I'll come back, and he's basically just talking about holidays, right? But I think that like that's an example of like someone who's kind of got so into the like kind of hustle porn kind of psychology of work thing that suddenly they've taken like this, they've invented a concept, right? Which is, they're calling it mini retirements, and it's like it's magical thinking. It's not like real, like, but it like he made it sound so important and novel, and it's like, no mate, you're just taking a holiday. So, but he's told himself a story around this magical thinking that has like made him have some deluded sense of like kind of insightfulness about something that's existed for centuries. So I thought that was a more irreverent kind of comedic version of like where storytelling can perhaps be weaponized in the wrong way.
He's almost like justifying his existence because maybe he is overworking and burned out and whatever it is. He's like, everyone says I should take holidays, so my weekend is actually my holiday, right?
It's like, and then mini retirement. I mean, he gets teased about it a lot now, so I think he's worn it well. But perhaps ideas above his station there. And
I think going back to your point about politics, one of the reasons I didn't want to get into politics is I feel like, especially now, I become quite apathetic when it comes to politics. And I think, and I study politics at uni, as you know, and I think one of the reasons is that there is generally, I think, in politicians, without going into who they are or what they are, right? But I think on every side of the political spectrum of not presenting a better future like you're talking about, and it's actually more presenting the problems, right? So going very deep on the villain, which, as
Yeah.
you said, from a psychological level, people can relate to, and you could say get manipulated. But I think there's also that balance of, okay, these are some of the problems we're going through. Instead of dwelling on that and making people obsessed with that, because I think everyone talks about polarization at the moment, but I think the polarization is getting obsessed about particular issues versus, okay, these are the problems. Problems happen all over the world. And one, let's admit we've made mistakes. Going back to your thing, what do you call it? Confident uncertainty, right? If politicians had that, people would have more respect, right? They relate to them more. But then they're doing that, but then they're not presenting a better future, right? So just say if it's the UK Labour, Tories, whoever it is, they're just against each other the whole time, saying this party's done this, the country's in this state because of this, versus saying, okay, we've got these problems, how are we going to make a better society? And I think, to me, that's what's missing in politics at the moment. I thought I could relate this to what you're talking about and your expertise with storytelling, which is how do we find that balance of we don't go too deep on the villain, right? That we actually present that like better future as well.
I think that like kind of political storytelling and political advertising, that definitely feels very kind of polarized and binary at the moment, where it's either like a lot of finger pointing, or it's a lot of kind of over promising. And so I think that one of the reasons why people like yourself might be apathetic towards it, and I don't think I'm particularly engaged either, is just I don't think there's many kind of people or conversations within that space that you can resonate with. And I think actually it's because there's a lack of good storytelling. It's everything feels very sanitized. It doesn't feel real. It doesn't feel relatable, and it's a bit sad in a way, but actually I think what an incredible opportunity at the same time. Like if there's like one thing that needs really, really good storytelling, it's like how are we going to fix the country, or how are we going to plan for the future prosperity of the generations that are to come. Like that is a place where if we were to move away from, I guess, the kind of over promising and the finger pointing kind of form of political point scoring, and focus on right, okay, it's a long and onerous and perhaps arduous journey, but like here are the steps we want to take, and here's why. Like there's definitely an opportunity to unite people behind better storytelling, behind that vision. So I think that maybe there's a need for a new type of political communicator that's less Alistair Campbell and more I don't know, Carl Jung.
We'll start our own party. Watch this space.
Watch this space.
Are there any, let's imagine you're working on a political campaign, you're starting your own company, or even like a personal brand, which is a big theme nowadays. Are there any companies or individuals you think have like really nailed it with storytelling?
I mean these are really like generic things, but like Apple and Nike as two brands, it's quite lazy to name check them, because obviously they're kind of titans of their respective industries. But I really think that they've been able to go beyond being a tech company or being just a sports company. Like the way that Nike kind of is able to, I guess, set the mood for an international football tournament with an advert, or the way that Apple is able to explain like new relationships with technology in a way that like it feels super relatable and everyday. I think that there's amazing kind of lessons you can learn from the approach that both those brands take. Both really simple. They don't over explain. They let the audience kind of complete the sentence for them. They don't treat the audience as idiots. They believe that less is more. So a lot of I guess I think lots of kind of things to be able to learn from those two brands and the principles of the way that they tell stories. In terms of I guess other kind of forms of inspiration, I personally think there's some podcasters out there that are really great. You'll probably get there one day, Mikey. But there's a chap I listen to called Scott Galloway, who I just think's just got an incredible way of articulating himself and kind of letting you into his emotional qualms in life, and the way he talks about, you know, how he thinks about business, how he thinks about his children, how he thinks about his future. There's this kind of there's a sense of rhetoric to it, you know, like it feels quite grand, at the same time it feels very accessible, and he's also got a real kind of good sense of humor, and he laughs at himself, so he's got that self-deprecation, you know. I think that he's just very engaging character, and those are, I think, people that I would personally kind of model some of my I guess techniques and kind of principles off.
Two things I wanted to talk about there. One is the less is more, but let's come back to that in a minute. Just wanted to say that so I remember it, going back to writing things down. The other point, which I think is interesting, because we discussed this after you listened to our friend Nick Gold on the show, around that balance of like not having trauma porn, and there's the whole like sad fishing of like talking about your problems and mental health online almost to, you know, get likes or whatever it is. So going back to you mentioned the point at the start around you know, letting people in emotionally, like in your childhood and things that have happened and all that stuff. But then there's also a line that maybe, you know, boundaries that you need to set. So I think this one's probably very related more to the personal brand and the personal story. But where do you think is that? How do you find that balance there? I'm
rubbish at personal brand. Like I barely post on LinkedIn. You know, I've always preferred to, I guess, do my talking through the work. So like, you know, you build up good roster of work or clients. But I really struggle with the personal brand thing, which is like very ironic because, you know, I do it for a living, but like, I hate posting on LinkedIn. I don't think I have the courage or the bravery to go out there and say things that could be controversial or, you know, like could be judged. Like I don't mind saying them in the workplace because I've been given a position of responsibility and authority to set a certain way of thinking or to set a certain standard, and you know, you've been chosen for that role, right? So you've got the confidence for that. But then like to just go out on LinkedIn and you know, like just, you know, say I think this or I think that, like, you know, I'm not sure that I've got the balls, to be honest.
What about some other people you think nailed it? So you said that guy Scott Galloway. You said he kind of lets you in is one of the things you said. So how do you think he's found that balance? What do you think he's done?
I don't really know. I mean, he was a pretty successful businessman in his own right. And I think he went and he became a professor. So I think, I guess that he's taken on the role of professor and he's just taken it out of the classroom. So, but maybe for someone like himself, like I guess he feels he has a remit to be authentic and credible in that kind of space that he feels he might have earned. Whereas perhaps, you know, for the first time in my life, I'm being humble. I don't know if I've earned that, you know.
No, I would say you have, but everything's relative, right? And I think there's a lot more you could be sharing.
There is, like maybe I should, maybe that'll be
even just this podcast today. I've certainly learned a lot.
This is my podcast debut, so
there we go. Let's get Honda viral, everyone listening. Share it with your friends.
All three of them.
Going back to less is more. So I think you've helped me with this, like when you've looked at campaigns I've been working on, and bit of a selfish thing here because we're analysing all of our content at Growth Genie at the moment, and a lot of it is very text heavy. So we're trying to remove text but almost say the same thing with less words, or even say more sometimes. But it's that difficult balance. And you were saying like Nike as an example, they're like not using a lot of text, but you're almost having more of a feeling in that way. So how can you do that? How can you, like, everyone, I've heard that a lot, less is more, but how can you like practically go about that? Let's say there's someone listening to this that's writing an essay or working on a campaign or whatever. Like, how do you actually create more of that less is more effect?
Well, I mean, if you're writing a dissertation or essay and, you know, the word limit is 10,000 words, I wouldn't go in with 5. So, you know, like less isn't more than that good a scenario. But I think when it comes to messaging, it's just there's two things you need, well, 3 things. Like 2 are like functional things and one's a behavioral thing. One is just like clarity, you know, like the more you have to kind of believe that the more like words or the more points you try and make, people don't remember bullet points, they don't remember lists. People remember how you made them feel. So you're going to detract from like how you make them feel the more you load them with rational stuff. You know, information enters through the heart, right? So like,
Yeah.
you know, decisions are emotionally made, rationally justified. Make them feel something first and foremost, I think is the ultimate, is the kind of ultimate objective. I think not treating the audience like an idiot is super important. Like kind of the way like I would just explain it is like let them complete the sentence themselves.
Yeah.
You know, like you know when like you see like, I don't know, like a puzzle and you're like, you kind of want to solve it, or like you see like, you know, a maths question and you're like, you know, like you're like, or like a limerick or crossword puzzle, like there's that thing, like this kind of innate curiosity that like kind of comes in. You're like, okay, I want to think about what that answer could be, right? Like I think that there's a thing here where if you just like list out the facts or the points and you don't let the audience complete the sentence themselves, then I think that innately it's just kind of less interesting. You know, I think you get the audience to cognitively engage if you let them in a bit. And then the final one would be around just courage to and have the courage and audacity to not overfill, you know, the point, or like to not over explain, you know, like it takes a lot of courage to go, that's it, we're done. You know, like we've said enough, you know, and that's it. That's like I think the most profound bit of less is more, you know, like, you know, you can be, I remember we were working on some of the stuff you were doing, you know, you were like, oh, can we put this in, you know, and it's like, I was like, you're done.
Yeah, it's true, because it's the I had attachment to those things. And it's like just attach, right? You've told your story, which is all you're trying to do, right?
Exactly, yeah. And the rest of it is just it's going to it's like think of it as like deposits and withdrawals, right? You know, so there are certain things you can say that are deposits, and like the more you say things, that there are opportunities for things to be withdrawals, you know, from how you remember something. So if you make an ad and like, you know, it's got a good visual and a good line, you know, that's 2 good deposits. You remember that brand. If it's got shitloads of text, then, you know, like, you know, it's got a bunch of bullet points and some terms and conditions. Like those are withdrawals. Those things that are
taxing on the brain.
Yeah, exactly.
It's making you feel worse, not better. Right?
Well, it's just deepening cognitive load that doesn't need to be kind of further deepened, I guess.
Yeah, like what you said around letting the audience finish a sentence, not treating them like idiots. That's a good takeaway. I'm definitely gonna. Yeah. With the emotional side of things, because it's funny enough, this is something we go into a lot with Growth Genie, is that feeling of like not always rationalizing. Obviously in sales, right? Sales leaders are obviously focused on like revenue numbers, even in marketing, it's like marketing leads, website traffic, whatever it is. But beyond that, we always say, like you said, you've got to connect with them first on that emotional level. Yeah. But sometimes I think it's difficult to do that because you've got to try and put yourself in their shoes. So it's like when you're writing copy or telling a story, is it through visualization? Like, how do you go about that, of like thinking, okay, how's someone feeling when they're writing this through? Because as you said, we're often going in with our own preconceptions.
Yeah, I mean, I think stripping back, I think the most important thing when you're, I guess, in any story that you're telling, unless if it's for art, then it's different to if it's for commerce, right? So if it's for commerce and commercial purposes, you know, stripping back the story to the point of leaving only the salient facts, I think is the smartest thing you can do, because it's respectful of the audience's time, the audience's attention. And again, it's about the kind of deposits versus withdrawals. You know, like if you keep it to just the salient facts, you only have just enough information to make the points that you want. You know, you can always dive deeper, but it can be in a different forum. You know, it's like you can, if you're a salesperson, you know, maybe it's you go, okay, the first touch point could be, you know, the 5-minute elevator pitch, and then it's like you send the 15-minute trawl through of documents with the facts and figures later. You know, like I think you can think about the different stages or gates at which you have different interactions with whoever you're trying to engage with, and think about it more as like, what's the different stories you tell at different touch points and different times in order to create kind of maximum impact.
Yeah, and that kind of goes into like the buyer's journey and where they're at.
Yeah, exactly.
Last question I wanted to ask you, is there any like particular resources around storytelling, any like authors or, you know, books, anything like that you think is useful, and like what have been some of your takeaways from those?
Yeah. There's a book called, actually the main book is called Story by Robert McKee. That's the thing that everyone says to read. And I think I read like maybe the first 3 chapters and then I stopped. Mainly out of laziness, not because it's not a great book. Pixar, I think, is an amazing company to follow on this. So there's a bunch of stuff online about kind of their 5 steps for storytelling or 6 steps for storytelling. There's a great book called Creativity Inc. By Ed Catmull, which is a little bit more also about like how to build a creative culture, but it's a book about how to help storytelling thrive. And then there's these do guides by David, I'm going to mispronounce his name, David Hyatt, who created a jeans brand called Hyatt Denim, but he was an advertising strategist in their previous life, and he's done a bunch of books called like Do Purpose, Do Story, Do Design, or things like that. And they're kind of those little small pamphlet kind of soundbite wisdom books that are quite inspiring to read every now and then. And so there's one on Do Story that I remember being very formulative to the way I think about it. Much thought to start thinking about it when I was younger.
Awesome. We'll put all of those links in the show notes. We'll put Hondi's LinkedIn, even though he's not very active. Yeah. So, but maybe he'll start posting after this. Who knows? But it's been fascinating. I've certainly learned a lot. It's always good to sit down with a friend. And then I think of a couple of key takeaways I liked was, don't treat your audience like idiots. Like, let them finish the sentence. Leave that kind of imagination to them. And then the older confident uncertainty. But any other big things you think the audience should take away?
I think the thing to strive for is always simplicity.
Yeah.
Like, simplicity is a beautiful thing, and I think that if you can bring simplicity to complexity through storytelling, that will be something that helps you in almost every aspect of your life.
Love it. Cheers, Hondi.
Thanks, mate.